to the show, and I was going to start out with, you've got a broad topic, a broad range of topics, all dealing with hidden archaeology and literally technologies and cultures that were here before us.
That's right, yes.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, I feel like a caveman all of a sudden.
Well, I was writing a history book some years ago in which I was going to just perhaps give the general line of history as understood by all of us, but in my research I was led to archaeological sites in more than 30 countries, and I began to realize that there were things that did not fit our view of history, out-of-place artifacts, which indicated, in the past, a very high technology. And I went looking for a pattern because one or two out-of-place things could be pushed aside. But once they start surfacing more and more of them all over the place, you realise that there's some story here that hasn't been told. And it wasn't just one or two, it was thousands. And so I just stopped what I was doing and started paying attention to the out-of-place things and realised that there was a worldwide pattern to them. And so I began focusing in on the pattern. And this, of course, indicated there was a global civilization in the past that had a very high technology and science, and they were very intelligent people, and that this had been lost, and we were just beginning to rediscover things.
Wow. So you actually, I mean, you start out as a mainstream archaeologist, you're writing a history book, and you start seeing tidbits that start adding up. You mentioned you actually go over, I was reading some of your documentation about ancient medical procedures that, from what I could tell, they seem to surpass even what we can do today.
Well, yes, they did have very high sophisticated technology in medicine, no question about that. And this was global too. We go from South America right across to Egypt and Asia, and we find such things as brain surgery, and I mean that's the ultimate, really, because when you tie up all the nerves and fibres that lead out from the brain, you've got something that's very intricate, much more than any other part of the body. And they were actually working on that part of the body, and they were having operations that people survived.
Are we talking the Atlantean society culture, or does it have a different name? Have we named?
We haven't named it, no. The evidence comes from what I would call post-flood civilizations. There was a definite break in history, and after this, several civilizations sprang up out of nowhere, as it were, within just a few hundred years. And what this does suggest is that there was another ex-civilization wiped out. Survivors, once there were enough of them to reproduce the knowledge that had been preserved, could then start from scratch at the top, not at the bottom. And so we have Egypt starting out. The very highest technology and knowledge of Egypt was in the early stages. The same with Samaria, the same with the Indus Valley. And these three civilizations virtually sprang up out of virgin soil, out of nowhere, at the top. And subsequent generations were just clumsy imitations on those same locations.
It would sound like what you would have today. I mean, I've got a vast range of information, or the average person does, yet, you know, it's not complete on each subject, and so it would dwindle down almost like a reverse pyramid effect.
That's what would happen, yes. The tendency is for civilizations to imitate and deteriorate as time goes on.
Now, we're talking about the fact that they had brain surgery, they had heart surgery. What are some of the other amazing technologies? I've read X-rays, microwaves, even computer disks. Can you elaborate on that and where these were discovered?
Well, one of the most wonderful things that, in my mind, was when I realised that a shipwreck had been discovered off the coast of Greece, actually off the island of Antikythera in the Aegean Sea, and there was a shipwreck which had a computer on board. Now, this was not something that had just suddenly been made. It did give evidence of something that had been developed over a period of time, but at 55 BC it was in full use. Now, we have always been taught, certainly I was, that ships in ancient times had to travel within sight of land to know where they were. Mm-hmm. But this computerized object, about the size of a portable computer today, was able to map out the positions of all the heavenly bodies by which ships navigated and predict them backwards and forwards in time. You'd set the dial, you'd pose your question, and up would come the answer. And this would enable a ship to know its longitude and latitude at any time, any place in the world if it had this on board. Mm. And this gathered dust for 50 years because no one knew what it was. It was covered actually among a lot of other stuff on the shipwreck. It was covered over with incrustation. And it was only 50 years later that it was discovered in 1951, and a scientist decided to try a more modern way of cleaning up things, and he was able to get off the incrustation, and it was enabled to be examined. And another scientist made a statement. He said, "This is like finding a jet plane in the tomb of Tutankhamun." That's how advanced it was.
That's incredible. That puts it into perspective. Now, most of this information is covered. Is the source for most of this information that people, if they want to look at it, is it in your book, Dead Men's Secrets, or?
Yes, that's right. Dead Men's Secrets, and a preview of Dead Men's Secrets is found at our website, which perhaps I should mention at www.beforeus.com. Beforeus.com. BEFOREUS.
Let me ask you, this entire show is going to be me asking you about these different, it blows me away at the hidden nature, and then to realize the technological advancements that were thousands of years before our time. But I want to ask this question right here and right now. Why is it being hidden? Why is it being subverted and kept quiet?
Well, there is a vested interest, Sancho, in keeping the established teaching profession where they are, to teach what they have been taught to pupils that come in for learning. And it's based upon the theory of evolution, if I might say, which has got a stranglehold on our education system, even though it's always been only a theory with no hard facts, and which science today is raising some big questions about. And the scientists who toe the line are given good jobs, and professors. Those who question are often locked out of special funding for their projects. Others who speak up lose their jobs. I know many cases of this happening, and so it's quite common in the world of science today to toe the line because your reputation's at stake. You've been teaching something. Suddenly you don't want somebody coming along and showing you that what you've been teaching for 20, 30, 40 years is wrong. Mm-hmm. Your career could be at stake, and funding as well. And I guess that's a big pull with any person. You've got to really stand up and be counted if you want to go for the truth, and that can risk a lot of things for you.
That's exactly. I open the show up with news, commentary, and opinion every time to make sure predominantly that everything's running properly before I get to my guests. But I was talking about the bravery of people such as yourself that will step out of the mold, that they won't become drones. They step out of the mold and they don't toe the line, because it is important. I don't quite. It almost seems like there's a mechanism of maybe it's control of energy, control of society is what's keeping this down. But you've got tales. I'm looking at a list here. Lost cities of the dead, radioactive skeletons, ancient artifacts that have been found that are radioactive. Can you tell us a little bit about these things?
Sure, yes. Where would you like me to start? There's so much in this.
Let's start with the lost cities of the dead. I see lost cities of the dead, and I'm also reading about radioactive people, and I'm just blown away at the culmination of it.
Okay, then. Well, around the world there are hundreds and possibly thousands. I mean, I know of 300 in the Americas alone that have ancient cities that have not yet been excavated, which is a lot. Probably around the world there must be thousands of these from going back thousands of years. And the jungles or the deserts have encroached on them until they're vine choked and unknown, or they're covered over. These are known to exist, and many of them have been found, but that's as far as they've gone. It takes money, it takes courage in dangerous areas to start excavating, and of course it takes a lot of breaking down of government red tape. So yes, there are, I would dare say, there are thousands of lost cities that have been totally lost and forgotten. And when we start digging into some of these, we find the things we're talking about. Now, when the Spaniards came to South America, they came across dead cities that were no longer inhabited, that were in the middle of jungles, largely cleared around them, but the jungle was encroaching all the time. And there were lights that never went out, like big globes on poles, on pillars, up to 20 feet tall, and then at the top there would be a globe, like a globe of the Earth, except that it was a light globe, which would start making itself evident when it got dark, and it would flood light all over the ground. Now, the Spaniards wrote about this. And go over to Papua New Guinea, to Irian Jaya, which is the western half, now as part of Indonesia. At a town planning conference in Pretoria, South Africa, some time back, two explorers were reporting to this town planning conference about their experience up there in the jungles near Mount Wilhelmina. And they put down their goods to sleep near some big rocky walls that they found in the jungle. And lo and behold, as the sun went down and it got slowly darker, they saw the whole place was illuminated still. These were big burning lights on pillars and lines, like we'd have street lamps today. And these were still burning in a ruin that was several thousand years old. And we have these in graves as well. Cicero, the Roman orator, his daughter, her grave was found in the 1500s, just outside Rome somewhere. And when they opened up the grave, there at her feet was an ever-burning light. Now, that had been burning almost 1,500 years. Mm. So they had a secret by which whatever, we don't know what it was, we can speculate that might have been some chemical inside there, it could have been anything, and it was still burning after all that time.
Now, you've read the accounts of these. Have you ever actually come across the remnants? I mean, I imagine I've traveled through Central America extensively, and I know the Spaniards would systematically go into an area and literally break the pyramids down and actually rebuild them into cathedrals and churches and such. Have you ever actually come across the remains of these lights?
No, I haven't personally come across the remains of the lights, but they're very well documented, and there's a lot of detail available if we go searching for it.
I remember what comes to mind is the Egyptian hieroglyph, where they have that what appears to be a long light bulb, and there's no pyramids of light or of any kind of a torch.
That's right, yes. And that's found in an old Egyptian temple. And not only that, but in Egyptian writings, it's reported that quite a few of the temples had these, and doors would open. You'd actually approach a building, going down a passageway, and a door would swing open, like an automatic doors we have today. And then when you got into that area, lo and behold, the lights would switch on automatically, because there was some connection between the opening of the doors and the switching of the lights on.
Wow.
Now, I have a Canadian friend, I guess it's about the closest I've got. I have a Canadian friend who's a scientist. He employs several thousand people in various fields, but primarily he is an explorer and an inventor. He explores the seabed and explores jungles for precious metals such as gold. and his team was down in the Amazon sometime back, and they were exploring, prospecting, and a group of natives waylaid them. Most of the party escaped, but Jerry was captured, and I guess he was left for dead by his team, and he was a prisoner there for 2 months. And they took him through an underground tunnel to a place that they were hiding. Now, actually, I wrote about this, Sancho, in my book, Dead Men's Secrets, not about this incident, because I didn't know about Jerry. I wrote about that tribe. The tribe actually went underground, and I wrote about this about 10, 15 years before I even met Jerry, and
Wow.
we started corresponding. And Jerry confirmed the tribe had gone underground because of genocide by helicopters in the jungle. They've been dropping, and they still do. And this has been going on now for quite a few years. There are people going into the jungle to claim land and to do this. They do it the easy way. They come in a helicopter, drop a bag of poison lollies laced with arsenic or with typhus. The natives pick it up and they share it around, and they all die. And so the land is available. They're doing this kind of thing right now in 2012.
It seems like there's a history. I mean, that is unfortunately the Western world's history is a displacement of native peoples. So
yes, very sad. And so this tribe it amounts to about 30,000 people, related tribes, all related, decided to go underground into one of the underground tunnel systems where there were settlements in the past, and they're living there right now. Anyway, Jerry was taken through the tunnel system, and as you approach this place where they're living, as you walk along, you get to a certain point, lights automatically come on for you. If you turn around and go back the other way, the lights go off again. So that's one that I know personally of, and I know the person who's actually experienced it. That's the closest I've got.
We're talking about tunnels that'll hold 30,000 people. Did I hear that right?
Yes, 30,000 people are at this very time living underground. They still go above ground at night to plant their crops. They have special cropping areas. As a matter of fact, this tribe does report that their ancestors lived in a great shining city above ground, and that the ruins of that city are there today near one of the tunnel entrances. As a matter of fact, some of the buildings had to be knocked down by this tribe in the 1970s to disguise the entrance to where they went underground, so that no one would come in and start exploring around and find the entrance. If it's just a ruined city, all in ruins, no one's going to look so much than if the city was still with buildings in it.
Where would you describe with I mean, we're literally talking about a prehistory, a veiled history. Where did it derive from? Was it entirely the world over, or did it have bases of operation? Was Antarctica, one of these bases? Was Antarctica covered with ice?
Antarctica was a base as well. And we have 14 ancient maps, Sancho, which deal with our past. And these maps have been partially preserved. Sections of them we do have today, which show a global Earth, not a flat Earth, and show Antarctica free of ice. One map shows Antarctica getting covered in ice, and then there's another one which shows it covered in ice. So during this period, the world was still being mapped and explored, and the transition from no ice to ice was very rapid, apparently.
That's so. Would you assess it being an entirely global civilization that thrived throughout the world, that had mass transit? I mean, with some of the technology you're describing, the computers, even flights, were they based literally all over?
It appears that it was a global civilization, yes, because if we go to South America, North America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and not so much in Australia. That hasn't been explored so much in the outback, but there are some things that raise my interest. But looks like it was on the five major. Oh yes, including Antarctica, there was civilization, no problem at all. And there are similarities. Ever-burning lights is one. Legends of flight is another one. We don't have evidence of flight, physical evidence, except for drawings, and in one case in South America we do have a vehicle. But the rest of the world, it's mainly stories, oral and written. We have machinery that's been found, or objects that have been fashioned by machinery, or parts of machinery even. And these are common around the world. We have knowledge of astronomy which is in all continents and in agreement from one continent to another. This, and also tunnel systems that have been found and documented, and I can tell you where some of them are, in Asia and in Europe and in Africa and in South America, with some stories coming out of North America as well from some of the early explorers. So it looks like you have a pattern, and this pattern is the same everywhere, and that would suggest a global civilization.
Would you rank, from what you've seen and the patterns, would you rank that prehistorical society higher than what we have today as far as technology, innovations, and the similar?
That's a good question. My answer would have to be yes and no. I've been able to list 64 aspects of technology which are ahead of our day. Or since I listed them in the last 2 or 3 years, we're catching up on a few of them, but they're still ahead of us in those points, basically. And other things, we don't have evidence for some of the things that we're able to do today. So they were a totally different civilization from us, but the human pattern is common to them. In other words, they were both done by humans, ours and theirs. And they achieved some things we're achieving, for example, flight, which we have achieved also, but they did it by a different approach. They didn't use the fossil fuels like we use, but it appears they used electromagnetism and they used mercury as a fuel. The French space program has talked about using mercury as a fuel, so it's understood to be scientifically possible today, but we don't do it. We use the sledgehammer approach to beat gravity to get off the ground. And we spend probably 90% of our fuel for an intercontinental flight on just getting off the ground. Mm-hmm. And the rest of it is getting to the destination. But they didn't have to worry about that. They had other means of doing the same, achieving the same result.
You've mentioned, Jonathan, that and I'm hearing it, that they had ulterior technologies, that they didn't use fossil fuel. You're speculating that mercury was used. Was that a key component, potentially, like mercury and anti-gravitic electromagnetism? What was their overall, like, in our 21st century, our energy is 90% or more fossil fuel derived. It's a little bit nuclear, but what was their driving energy consumption at that time?
Well, we don't really know. We can only go by what they've told us and left behind. However, Russian excavators recently discovered in some caves what may be age-old instruments used in aircraft flight, but we don't know. I mean, inferior civilizations, suppose our civilization was destroyed, and other people came in who, a few generations later, and saw something. They saw part of one of our computers. It'd be a hard job for them to work out what it was, if you understand me. That they'd see bits of metal in there, they might see a screen or something, they'd say, what the heck is this? And they'd guess and speculate, and maybe somebody would guess it right, but most people may not. And when we come to hear this, I'll tell you what they found anyway. There were hemispherical objects of glass or porcelain, ending in a cone above them, each one carefully sealed, and each one containing a single drop of mercury. The containers were very sophisticated, as though they were containing something that was very important, but the only thing that each of them contained was that single drop of mercury.
Incredible.
if we marry that up to the reports of the use of mercury as being something that they talked about as helping them in their airborne travels, maybe that is one of the first evidences that would prove their writings correct.
So tell me about the radioactivity, the finding. Are we looking at an ancient global catastrophe, an ancient nuclear war, or do you suspect that we're using nuclear technology and the radioactivity is just a kind of a byproduct like we have today?
Well, I would say that there was nuclear war, and in possibly 5 places that I could mention. One that's very pertinent, I believe, is where we have skeletons that are radioactive as well. And we do have writings. We're talking about the Indian subcontinent, where writings have recorded that one civilization threatened another civilization and warned its inhabitants to get out of your city because within 7 days we're sending a fire from the sky upon you. We'd call that a missile, a nuclear missile. Mm-hmm. Now, it appears that the civilization destroyed was in the Indus Valley region of what's today Pakistan. And skeletons in the ruined city of Mohenjo-daro, and also its sister city of Harappa, are extremely radioactive. The ruins of these ancient Indus Valley cities are enormous. They're thought to have contained well over a million people, and this goes back to shortly after 2000 BC. Population increases were pretty noticeable back there at that time, as they are today. Practically nothing is known of the histories of these places except that both were destroyed suddenly. Now, in Mohenjo-daro, in an epicenter about 150 feet wide, everything crystallized, fused, or melted. 180 feet from the centre, the bricks are melted on one side, which indicates a blast from above. And it's interesting that excavations down to the street level revealed 44 scattered skeletons in the city square. It's almost as though doom had come suddenly upon them and they couldn't get out. And some of them were still in their houses. And all the skeletons were flattened to the ground. One case that interests me is a father and a mother and a child found flattened in the street, face down and still holding hands together. And these skeletons, after thousands of years, now there'll be skeptics who'll say that radioactivity doesn't last so long, but these are among the most radioactive that have ever been found.
Wow. That's that would be normally impossible. I was thinking modern science, that's impossible, but it's hidden. I've seen, like I grew up in Texas, and I went to Rockwall, Texas, and you know, it's a rock wall. That's the reason it's called Rockwall, Texas, except it's buried. Yeah. And so I listen to this, and I'm listening to you talk about radioactive skeletons, and it's believable, but it's so far out there from what we're taught in school, I guess, is where it's spellbinding, literally.
Yes, it is. I should say that Russian archaeologists can take the credit for discovering this radioactivity in Pakistan.
Incredible. That's. Tell me about other pyramids. You have found the world's largest pyramid. Are there others out there?
There are others out there. There are hundreds of pyramids. Perhaps people don't realise that there are close to 100 pyramids in Egypt. We only think of the Great Pyramid and the two next to it, and then maybe the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, but there are other pyramids, mostly smaller, of course. And these pyramids were not. But let me just throw this in. Put a cat among the pigeons. These pyramids were not built as tombs. Some of the later imitation pyramids were, but the initial ones were not. But go across to China. We have 40 miles west in the province of Shenxi, which is in northwest China, 40 miles west of the city of Xi'an, there is a great pyramid which was discovered by a couple of Americans in the 1920s. And these same explorers believed they were the only people in the world at the time to have seen both the pyramids of Egypt and the Chinese pyramids. They estimated the biggest one was up to 1,200 feet tall. And if you take into account that it was a flat-topped pyramid that didn't have a peak like the ones in Egypt, it was flat-topped, just much like the Mexican pyramids. But you take its bulk, its volume, it would be about 26 times bigger in volume than the Empire State Building in New York.
What were they built for? You injected that you don't think they were built for tombs, and I like the diversity. What were these things? Did they all have the same purpose, or did they serve different purposes?
We don't know what the purpose of the Chinese ones were. However, we do know that they painted. This particular pyramid was painted in 4 colours, and each colour had a significance according to Chinese legend. And they were orientated to the North Magnetic Pole, just as the Great Pyramid of Egypt is, and other pyramids around the world. It does appear that the pyramid shape has a quality of its own, and that is that it can gather power, gather electricity, and disperse it from, it's like a power generator, a power station and generator, and disperse it around the countryside. And it is possible that pyramids were located, well, we do know that many of them were located on energy springs, where energy springs crisscross each other. You know how under the ground we have water springs and water channels, and Dowsers claim to have good success with those. There are also electrical energy fields under the Earth, which are like streams. And of course our Earth is spinning like a dynamo, and it's natural that energy springs would be under the Earth, and pyramids were often sighted on the junction of such energy springs, as were standing stones, of which there were many in ancient times. And studies on the standing stones has shown that they do have the ability to gather energy and disperse it through the countryside. Now, if you go to Egypt and you ask the aviation department, they'll confirm that commercial planes are forbidden to fly over the Great Pyramid because of electrical charges coming up from the apex.
That's the first time I've ever heard that. That is mind-blowing. I've never. That is incredible. And that is something that you can literally go and they will openly tell you.
I don't know if they'll openly tell you. You may have to twist their arm. It's a little bit like the Chinese, but yes, they do give that command, absolutely. And in China, it's interesting that the Chinese denied the pyramids in China. A German archaeologist just a few years back spent 2 years in China, and because of that, he was able to get into the confidence of local people who would never just tell these things to a tourist. And once you get to know people and you become friends, they'll confide things to you. And this man actually was taken to places in the same area as this pyramid I've just spoken of in China. And from the top of one pyramid, he was able to photograph a whole lot of other pyramids, and he eventually catalogued 100 pyramids in that part of China. Not nearly as big as the one we spoke about, but still, they were pyramids. He decided it was time to go to the government in Beijing and confront them with this and say, look, why don't you open this for the world? This is a marvellous tourist attraction. And of course, if you go to China as a tourist, I understand it's still so that you just don't go around wherever you choose. You go on a special tour with a guide, and that's the general policy in China. Mm-hmm. They take you where they want to take you, and they don't where they don't. So he went to the people in Beijing, and they said, there's no pyramids in China. They just told him. So he fortunately had taken some photographs of them, and he pulled them out of his jacket pocket, and he said, "Well, gentlemen, what are these?" And then they admitted to him that there were pyramids in China. And they said, "But the world is not spiritually clean enough to reveal these to them."
What an interesting response. That, I mean, we're talking. It's got the world's biggest pyramid there, plus another 100, at least 100 more. I remember the video. I believe he had video footage of those pyramids that was just very compelling. Why, and this is again the first time I've ever heard them. I've never heard that. What an odd response. The world is not spiritually ready for the revealment. Aren't they destroying? I've read that they're actually trying to cover up the pyramids. They're planting things on them, trying to get them covered up where people don't notice them. That it's just the hill down the road. Is that correct?
Oh yes, and not all of them are suffering that, but some are. Yes.
I mean, what are your speculations? Do you think they were used in China as energy accumulators and distributors there as well? I mean, when we're talking about the size of something, I believe you said 27 times, or the volume of 27 Empire State Buildings, I can't imagine the amount of a civic works project, the size of that. I mean, it's just mind-blowing.
It certainly is mind-blowing, and we can speculate and think we've got the answer, Sancho, but I still don't know what the reason was for the pyramids in China. But all we can do is extrapolate from the use of pyramids in other places.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Tell me about giants. Did they exist?
Oh yes, absolutely. I have seen giant footprints, which would be from people who. The footprints are twice as long as the footprints you and I would make. That would indicate people twice our height, I would think, if everything is in proportion. My wife comes from an island in the Pacific called Rotuma. It's about 400 miles north of Fiji. It's a Polynesian island. They're not Melanesian like the Fijians, but it's a isolated spot which doesn't have tourists. It's only 14 miles long, has about 2,000 people living on it, and it's called locally, around other islands around it, the Island of Tombstones, because the ancient graves there are bigger in graveyard area than the present day villages. So there was a civilization there, and you open up the graves. In fact, what they do today, they're short of burial space, so they do open up some of these graves, and they put the newly deceased people in them. But already in there are these big giant skeletons. And at my wife's grandmother's funeral, in the family plot, they dug a new grave, and in the process dug up a shin bone that came right up to her mother's waist. So this does exist, and that's just one little island. But I've handled parts of bodies, not a complete skeleton, but I've had parts of bodies which indicate, like hands and so on, which indicate that people were at least 12 feet tall in the past. A lot of people.
Did they have this is coming from left field here. Did they have television?
Did they have television? We can only guess, but in China there is something that is a little bit like television, where two, and some of these may still exist, but the writings talk about them, where you have two screens facing each other, and when they face each other, and I'm not quite sure what you do with them, but they can show pictures of other parts of the world. These two screens face each other, and you link it up with something, and they show pictures far away that are out of your eyesight. Mm. And these go back, we don't know how far, maybe a couple of thousand years.
I mean, this information it is mind-blowing. In all honesty, you mentioned a couple things that I was completely unaware of. One was the excuse the Chinese government gave as to the reason the world's literally not ready, and then the second one was flying over the Great Pyramid. I did not know that wasn't allowed or was prohibited. I mean, I've got to say that Why? You've got another book, I believe, The Forbidden Secret. Is that correct? Charting your rescue from...
Yes, The Forbidden Secret. And that deals with quite different matters, but that's my latest book, yeah.
What is, I mean, well, is it different? I mean, you're talking about a rescue. Why? All this hidden history seems to be suppressed. It seems to be covered up. You've got other governments stating, well, it doesn't exist, but now that you've shown us that it does, we can only say the world's not ready for it. Why the suppression?
I believe we've got a great spiritual battle going on in this world between the forces of good and evil, to be honest with you, Sancho. And we're held captive by forces which are hostile to us. I have no doubt about that. I've got too much evidence of that. And I write a lot about this in the new book, The Forbidden Secret. And it's just like, kidnappers. People have reported that kidnappers often are revered by the kidnapped victims. I don't know if you've ever heard that before.
Oh, yeah.
But after some time in the presence of a kidnapper, a person is full of tears when the kidnapper is rescued. They almost look upon them as a mentor. I guess it comes about because over periods of days or weeks, a person is victim, they can't escape, and they learn to realise that their life depends upon the good graces of the person that's kidnapped them, and when that person feeds them and they're sleeping in the same place and they talk, they develop an attachment for their kidnapper, and this is not an isolated thing. It's called the Stockholm Syndrome. It's got an official name. And it's an incredible, and I believe our society has developed an attachment to the policies of should I dare say it, our kidnappers. This planet is under the control of people who are not up to some good, and we've sort of got used to being under their influence or under their control, and they've got the media under their control, they've got the education system, they've got the drug industry, they've got so many things under their control, and we have acquiesced, and we have lost our ability to think for ourselves because we accept what they tell us.
I agree. Do you believe when we look, when we discuss the remnants, the patterns of discovery of remnants of advanced technology, advanced cultures in our past, do the powers that be, the people in control of our world today, the ones that are suppressing us, have they back-engineered some of that ancient technology?
I think that's quite possible. There were flying vehicles that today you'd call them UFOs, and they were manufactured in places like India and other places, and they were just normal, human-made flying vehicles. But some of them, you would say that was a UFO if you saw it today. So even to the shape of the circle, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But they did this by electromagnetism. It was a case of responding against the law of gravity by electromagnetism. And one cancels out the other so they can get airborne. Now, I understand that Hitler was very close to being on the track of some of this lost technology, and that after the war, a number of his scientists were brought into the West, and they began to they continued what they were doing before, and that there are secret government projects that are utilising a lot of this knowledge today, and that some of the most are not, but some of what have been reported as UFOs in our lifetime are very likely parts of these projects.
Mm.
A minority of them, but enough to say that this kind of technology does exist, but it's not being used for the good of mankind. It's being used in special secret projects.
Yeah, they I've actually done some studying into that. They've got what they call special access programs, which are set aside from the government, to where the Freedom of Information Act, at least in the United States, can never apply.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really...
That's interesting.
It is. It's interesting. Tell me about your $100,000 challenge here with this latest book.
Okay. In my book, I have laid out the fact, quite a few facts actually, the fact that we have been kidnapped. Well, actually, I start off by saying, did life appear spontaneously, then evolution took over, and documented and observable scientific evidence from DNA, biology, and fossils says no, it hasn't. And then I've gone into, have we had a UFO alien start? Did mankind originate by seeding from outer space? And then I have stated that physical and experimental evidence says no. Then I've gone on to the next step. Observable scientific evidence indicates that an effect is not greater than its cause. I mean, that's the law of science, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It always takes a greater source of information to produce information. And so the intricate design of human life, intelligence, and personality has to require a cause which possesses, in the very least, life, intelligence, and personality outside the creation itself. And then I developed this to ask whether this greater power has communicated with us. And I continue on to develop the theme that this planet has been hijacked. The people in charge are against the one who designed us, but this one who designed us has a rescue plan, and there is a way to know the rescue plan and take advantage of it. And I'm offering $100,000 because I have documented this in 624 pages, so that I believe that no skeptic can say that what I have presented has a claimable prize attached to it if they can disprove it.
That's an incredible challenge. That's a very sure challenge. That's very sure of the topic at hand. It seems like our captors, when we look at a global lost society, ranging from giants to cities of the dead to tunnels, caves, and the such, it seems like what we're dealing with today is, as you said, a spiritual battle, but it's something that looks like it's been logged in the annals of history before history. Would you say that's close?
Oh, yes, very close. Very, very close, Sanjay.
I mean, where should people go? What is your advice for people? We've got about 13 minutes left. I want to look at solutions. Is the solution talking about this, getting the information out there, letting people know that there's something more than what we're being told? Are there other things that we can do?
Well, there's two ways to approach this. From a physical standpoint, we are looking at disaster staring us in the face, whether it be economic disaster or man-made disasters such as wars and radiation and so on. The first thing I would suggest to anybody who's living in a big city is to get out of that city as soon as you can. Cut your ties, get into a country location and environment and start growing your own food. There is a physical problem with a physical solution. Then there's a spiritual problem, and I would say that the best way to ultimately survive beyond all that is to get into communication with your designer, the one who designed your body, the one who created you, and get into a relationship with that person. I'm going to call him a person because only one with personality could have created people with personality. You can't create something that's greater than yourself. You can only create something that you are equal to yourself. So we've got somebody who cares about us, he cares about what he's made. Get into communication with him, get to know him, follow his rules, because he has communicated with us and he's left us something that we can understand. And there remains a spiritual survival beyond the physical. So that's my advice.
Mm-hmm. I actually like how you phrased that, and I agree fully. Do you see in our future, even in our near future, is some of this ancient technology, some of the ancient discoveries, even what the Chinese government said, you're not spiritually ready. Do you see that unfolding in our lifetimes, the unveiling, so to speak?
I do believe that for some it will be so, but for so many it will not be so. We are too comfortable. We don't like changing, and most of us are in the middle of a mess, and we don't know how to get out of it. We've got to sit up and take notice. That's why I've offered $100,000. If people are not interested, then I'll get somebody interested because they'll like the money side of it.
Yeah. I'm thinking, wait, I'm agreeing with your thesis right now, but I'm going, hey, wait a second, let me create an antithesis here.
Okay, create the antithesis, Sancho. I'm interested.
No, I really don't have one. For all intents and purposes, I agree with what you're saying. Have you ever run across, my mind is shell-shocked, actually, at the Chinese government. Have you ever run across any other governmental agencies or, let me say, potentially shadow power-type brokers that have, in your opinion, had the same lines of reasoning as the Chinese government, or even hiding information from us, discoveries?
Well, hiding information certainly, and nothing less than here where I'm sitting right now in this little country of New Zealand, and it's all over the world happening, of course. Well, it happened in America. Let me give you a connection between New Zealand and the United States. A New Zealand girl here, Lisa Kerr, she was working with the New Mexico Parks Department, and she helped to excavate a large number of skeletons exposed after a washout. Now, these were giant skeletons. And then each day as they were doing their work, she and the other workers were searched. But they were also obliged to sign secrecy documents ensuring that they would never divulge details of their participation in this project. And before she left, government officials came in trucks and loaded up the evidence and took it away.
That sounds... Oh, wow. That's like slave labor. God, that is mind-blowing. And it goes on all around us. Oh,
it does, yeah. Here in New Zealand, Noel Hilliam is a curator of the Dargaville Maritime Museum. He heard of finds up in what they call the Waipua Forest in the northern part of New Zealand's North Island, which showed evidence that Celts were in New Zealand and had settlements 3,000 years ago here in this little country.
Celts from
Celts.
The UK.
From the UK, yeah. In other words, this is long before New Zealand was ever discovered. And he wanted to publicise this, and immediately, he spoke to other archaeologists. They went to the government. They publicised this, opened it up to the public, because there are land claims going on, of course, in New Zealand, and the people who claim they were here first, naturally, are the Maoris. They came before the Europeans, but not too much before. And this would cause a tremendous uproar among all the negotiations that are going on. So the government felt it handy, and of course it would also throw our history into chaos. Mm-hmm. So the government passed a regulation stating that any news, any evidence of this archaeological forest area discovery could not be released until the year 2061, I think it is.
I'm glad someone leaked the information. That is, and this is directly dealing with New Zealand.
Where I live, yes.
With them literally being, with the Celts being there. Why? I mean, that just blows me away. The secretive nature of the controlling empire right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's incredible.
I'll give you another one from Australia. ABC National Radio announced that amateur historian and archaeologist Val Osborne, living in Queensland, the state of Queensland, had traced evidence of the early mining endeavours of the Phoenicians around 1000 BC. Well, there's another something 3,000 years ago, this time in Australia. And, of course, the popular line taught in the universities and the schools in Australia and elsewhere is that the first discoverers of Australia, apart from the Aborigines who were there already, was when Abel Tasman, the Dutch explorer, came by in 1642. So that is defended hotly, that old teaching. Okay, when Val Osborne found evidence that the Phoenicians had come all the way from the Mediterranean around 1000 BC, he went to the media. And the Australian Broadcasting Corporation on the 6 o'clock news, prime time, when everybody is watching the news, announced what he had found. Immediately the story broke. The academics closed ranks to stamp it out. And, of course, academia depends on government funding, and it's naturally a subject of government censorship. So a Central Queensland University representative was interviewed on the 6 o'clock news afterwards. He had been told by the university to go up to the site as an archaeologist and then come back officially with his authority to state that nothing was up there, that Val Osborne had made a mistake. And he was interviewed on the 6 o'clock news, and he was represented as an archaeology expert. And when really, do you know what he was? He was an art history teacher at the university.
Wow. If that is not subversion, I don't have a clue what else would be. That is just in your face.
Yeah.
Jonathan, we've got about 4.5 minutes left. I want to read out something. I'm actually reading our chat, and I'm going to give a shout-out. This is actually to an Anon 0829. They say, please tell Mr. Gray I've read everything he's ever written, and he's the most amazing archaeologist. So. Oh,
well, thank you. That's very kind.
Today you've certainly opened my mind to a few different prospects, and I appreciate that. Can you give us the information on your books and your site again, so people that want to follow up will have that ability?
Sure, yes. My site is beforeus.com, www.beforeus.com. Now, what I'd like to offer to anyone listening is to enrol in my free newsletter, which I'll send out once a week. That if they just scroll down about 1/4 of the way down the page, they'll see a little square box where they put their first name and their email address, and automatically they get enrolled. Now, at the bottom of the page, there are some links. And on the right-hand side, there's one link which says Other Products. And clicking on that, you'll have a whole list come up with links to the various books which are available.
Okay. I'm actually on your site right now. I'm trying to get enrolled. What are we going to look forward to in your weekly newsletter? I'm just curious.
Each week we send out an archaeological discovery, or a discovery that's linked to modern events and shows how archaeology applies today and what lessons we can learn from it even today. And it changes. It changes from day to day on all different topics. And each time I do offer either DVDs or books at the end of the letter. No one has to buy them. They get the free newsletter information anyway. But my approach is this. If you want to know more, it's in the books or it's in the videos. But I'm still giving you plenty of interesting stuff that you can enjoy, free of charge.
Absolutely, and I've enjoyed today. I want to thank you for coming on our program, Jonathan. I'd love to have you back in the future sometime.
Oh, that would be a pleasure.
Well, thank you. I guess you're off to go do some classes and teach some other people today, huh?
Yes, I am. And however, it's been a great pleasure speaking with you, Sancho, and I wish you well with your program. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Jonathan. We'll let you go, and I appreciate it very much.
Finding a jet plane in the tomb of Tutankhamun. That's how advanced it was.
That's incredible. That puts it into perspective. Now, most of this information is covered. Is the source for most of this information that people, if they want to look at it, is it in your book, Dead Men's Secrets, or? Yes,
that's right. Dead Men's Secrets, and a preview of Dead Men's Secrets is found at our website, which perhaps I should mention at www.beforeus.com. Beforeus.com. BEFOREUS.
Let me ask you. I mean, this entire show is going to be me asking you about these different. I mean, it blows me away at the hidden nature, and then to realize the technological advancements that were thousands of years before our time. But I want to ask this question right here and right now. Why is it being hidden? Why is it being subverted and kept quiet?
Well, there is a vested interest, Sanjo, in keeping the established teaching profession where they are, to teach what they have been taught to pupils that come in for learning. And it's based upon the theory of evolution, if I might say, which has got a stranglehold on our education system, even though it's always been only a theory with no hard facts, and which science today is raising some big questions about. And the scientists who toe the line are given good jobs, and professors are those who question.
Welcome you to the show, and I was going to start out with, you've got a broad topic, a broad range of topics, all dealing with hidden archaeology and literally technologies and cultures that were here before us.
That's right. Yes.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, I feel like a caveman all of a sudden.
Well, I was writing a history book some years ago in which I was going to just perhaps give the general line of history as understood by all of us, but in my research I was led to archaeological sites in more than 30 countries, and I began to realise that there were things that did not fit our view of history, out-of-place artefacts, which indicated, in the past, a very high technology. And I went looking for a pattern, because one or two out-of-place things could be pushed aside. But once they start surfacing more and more of them all over the place, you realise that there's some story here that hasn't been told. And it wasn't just one or two, it was thousands. And so I stopped what I was doing and started paying attention to the out-of-place things, and realised that there was a worldwide pattern to them. And so I began focusing in on the pattern that had been discovered off the coast of Greece, actually off the island of Antikythera in the Aegean Sea. And there was a shipwreck which had a computer on board. Now, this was not something that had just suddenly been made. It did give evidence of something that had been developed over a period of time, but at 55 BC it was in full use. Now, we have always been taught, certainly I was, that ships in ancient times had to travel within sight of land to know where they were. Mm-hmm. But this computerized object, about the size of a portable computer today, was able to map out the positions of all the heavenly bodies by which ships navigated and predict them backwards and forwards in time. You'd set the dial, you'd pose your question, and up would come the answer. And this would enable a ship to know its longitude and latitude at any time, any place in the world if it had this on board. Mm. And this gathered dust for 50 years because and no one knew what it was. It was covered actually among a lot of other stuff on the shipwreck. It was covered over with incrustation, and it was only 50 years later that it was discovered in 1951, and a scientist decided to try a more modern way of cleaning up things, and he was able to get off the incrustation, and it was enabled to be examined. And another scientist made a statement. He said, "This is like making history." And after this, several civilizations sprang up out of nowhere, as it were, within just a few hundred years. And what this does suggest is that there was another ex-civilization wiped out. Survivors, once there were enough of them to reproduce the knowledge that had been preserved, could then start from scratch at the top, not at the bottom. And so we have Egypt starting out. The very highest technology and knowledge of Egypt was in the early stages. The same with Sumeria, the same with the Indus Valley. And these three civilizations virtually sprang up out of virgin soil out of nowhere at the top. And subsequent generations were just clumsy imitations on those same locations.
It would sound like what you would have today. I mean, I've got a vast range of information, or the average person does, yet, it's not complete on each subject, and so it would dwindle down almost like a reverse pyramid effect.
That's what would happen, yes. The tendency is for civilizations to imitate and deteriorate as time goes on.
Now, we're talking about the fact that they had brain surgery, they had heart surgery. What are some of the other amazing technologies? I've read X-rays, microwaves, even computer disks. Can you elaborate on that and where these were discovered?
Well, one of the most wonderful things that, in my mind, was when I realised that a shipwreck had been, and this of course indicated that it was a global civilization in the past that had a very high technology and science, and they were very intelligent people, and that this had been lost, and we were just beginning to rediscover things.
Wow. So you actually... I mean, you start out as a mainstream archaeologist, you're writing a history book, and you start seeing tidbits that start adding up. You mentioned you actually go over, I was reading some of your documentation about ancient medical procedures that, from what I could tell, they seem to surpass even what we can do today.
Well, yes, they did have very high sophisticated technology in medicine, no question about that. And this was global too. We go from South America right across to Egypt and Asia, and we find such things as brain surgery, and I mean that's the ultimate, really, because when you tie up all the nerves and fibres that lead out from the brain, you've got something that's very intricate, much more than any other part of the body. And they were actually working on that part of the body, and they were having operations that people survived.
Are we talking the Atlantean society culture, or does it have a different name? Have we named?
We haven't named it, no. The evidence comes from what I would call post-flood civilizations. There was a definite break